So today is the first official day that our new deep well is being powered by the sun, and I had the thought that I should put together a video basically showing you guys our entire off-grid water system from top to bottom. I don't know that I've ever done this in a dedicated video, and I had the thought that I would also list all of the parts in the description that I've used along the way. Now, this has been a work in progress, and if you've been following along this summer, you know that we recently switched from our shallow well to the new deep well. And I'm going to go down to the very bottom and show you the lowest point in our water system. Then I'm going to go up to the tanks and show you the highest point in our water system. And I'm going to give you all the calculations in between to show you basically why our water system is really no different than what you would have in town as far as the pressure is concerned, as far as the volume is concerned. But as far as the water quality is concerned, I believe our water quality is way better than what you're going to get in a city or a town because it's pure and it's clean. So I'm also going to show you all the filtration system along the way. But this isn't something that happened overnight. This is something that has frankly happened over the last 7 years. And what I'm also going to do is kind of give you a recap along the way of where we started and again where we are right now. So let me back up and say that about a year ago, 9-10 months ago, it became obvious that we needed to make some changes with our water system. The shallow well that we had been using up until this point, that it was in our best interest if we figured out a better, more secure system closer to the house. And therefore, about 2.5 months ago, I had this well drilled down to almost 150 feet deep. And once the well was drilled, it was then my responsibility to figure out which pump I was going to use, to figure out how I was going to power it. Again, my plan, because we're completely off-grid, the plan was to use solar to do everything. But if you look up the hill right here, on these late fall, early winter, short winter days, we only get about 4 hours of sunlight. So I had to figure out how I was going to make up for the lack of sunlight with either an alternative power source or basically water storage. And I've done both. So I'm going to take you up to the water tanks here in just a second. But before I do that, I'm going to go inside and show you the system inside. But again, as of today, the solar panels are powering our pump, which is pumping water from right here. It's about 160 feet in elevation up to two 5,000 gallon Norwesco water tanks that are built into the side of a hill in an underground structure, so the tanks are not vulnerable to freezing. And I have over 1,000 feet, probably closer to 1,500 feet of 1-inch blue poly water lines running all over our property. We've made changes as we needed to make changes. Once we realized that that shallow well was not going to be a long-term solution to our family's needs, we drilled a new well. Now we have the best water that we've ever had. And again, even though it was difficult getting to this point, it was one of the better decisions we've made. So let's go inside and look at the water filtration. As it's cooling off and the fall colors are changing, remember that Poncho has you covered. I've been wearing the Poncho denim shirts for the last month, and they are by far my new favorite shirts. These shirts are comfortable, durable, and versatile for whatever the season brings. Most flannels can be bulky and stiff. This flannel is light, yet still warm. This is the perfect layer for when the temperatures drop. The flannel wicks sweat, dries fast, and is ready for the outdoors.
Sometimes you need a shirt that can really take a beating. That's what the new Tough Thread is made for. It's the toughest fabric yet, reinforced with ripstop technology. Ripstop fabric is usually made for jackets and packs. It's cool to see it in a shirt. It's lightweight, breathable, and quick drying. It's made for pros who need gear that lasts.
Poncho's promise is free shippings and returns and exchanges to make sure you get the right fit. Poncho stands by every shirt. Gear up for fall with Poncho. Every piece is built for comfort, performance, and lasting style.
Go to ponchooutdoors.com/redpoppyranch. Enter your email to get $10 off your first order. That's PONCHO outdoors.com/redpoppyranch for $10 off and free shipping.
And when they ask how you heard about them, let them know that Red Poppy Ranch sent you. It really helps our show. Thank you, Poncho. I love the denim. I really love the flannel. And I also love the new Tough Thread. Thanks again. This is the inside of our utility room. You can see our Lion Energy battery bank. We've got all kinds of stuff in here, from dog food to toilet paper, you name it. This is kind of where my lovely wife chooses to put everything that keeps our world turning. But step one is the water comes in the corner of the room and runs through two 1-inch Big Blue filters. These are called 20-inch Big Blues. Again, I'm going to put all the links to everything in the description below. But the first filter is a sediment filter, which is basically just a catch-all. It's going to catch anything big enough, sand, dirt. When we use that shallow well, I would change these filters about twice a year, because as the water table went up and down, the water quality would change a little bit. But then after that shallow well, we have what's called a carbon filter. And then I have this ultraviolet light filter. It's not even really a filter. It's just a tube with two UV lights in it, two fluorescent UV lights in it, that as the water runs through it, it kills anything potentially that's living in it. So again, because of that shallow well, there was always a possibility of contamination simply because of how close it was to the surface. I installed that fluorescent UV light probably 5 years ago. I've replaced the bulbs in that a couple of times. Once it goes through the fluorescent UV light, then it breaks off and feeds our tankless water heater, basically the hot and cold inside of our house. Now, if you've been paying attention, then you know that we've had an ongoing problem with tankless water heaters. And some of that had to do with how hard the water was coming out of that shallow well, but also part of it was just the brand of tankless water heaters that I use. So this is technically our 6th tankless water heater, and this is a very high quality Navian NPE 240A, I believe is the model. I have a sediment filter to catch anything coming out of the hot side, because we had a common problem with sediment getting into the aerators and different things throughout the house. So I threw this 10-inch Big Blue filter in line just to catch the sediment. And this filter here I installed initially with the very first A.O. Smith tankless water heater that I installed. Rather than having a water softener, there are filters that are going to catch some of the calcium and some of the hard stuff that has the potential to do a lot of damage to your tankless water heaters. And that's what this is. This is a filter that once a year has to be changed, and it should increase the life of anything that it runs through. But now what we have found with our new deep well is the water is much softer. The one thing that I didn't do initially that probably I should have done was installed an expansion tank. And what an expansion tank does is, as a water heater heats the water up, the water expands and it gives the water a place to go. So rather than the pressure going up in your pipes and in your water heater, there's a balloon basically inside this tank that compresses with that water. So this should also help the Navian tankless water heater last a long time. So that's basically it on the filtration. I do have a carbon filter on the refrigerator. In my opinion, if you have a good water source, there's no need for any more than the filters that we have. I could take that UV fluorescent light filter out of there if I wanted to, because there's no longer a concern with contamination with this deep well the way that there used to be with that shallow well. But I like having it. I'm going to keep using it. It's insurance is all it is to me. Plus that thing was expensive when I bought it initially, and there's nothing wrong with it, so I might as well just keep using it. I forgot to mention the well controls and the inverter that control our new deep well pump. So at the moment, even though it is an overcast, slightly cloudy day, you can see the light flashing. That means the pump is pumping. It's a progressive pump, so it will slowly spin up faster and faster the more sunlight it gets. But even on an overcast day like today, it's still pumping water into our system. I also have on my phone, I have an app that's connected to a tank level indicator up in our tanks that is battery powered. And that right there tells me that the tank level indicator is working up in our tanks. And so from my phone, I can access how full, how low, how high the water is. And if need be, on those short winter days, if the water starts to get down to 6-7%, I simply throw the switch on the transfer switch right here over to inverter, and this inverter gets plugged in, And we're now using the batteries in our house instead of the backup generator, the gas generator that I used for years to power the inverter when it was down on the shallow well. So everything is controlled in here in the utility room, and that's what I wanted. I wanted it very simple for my wife. If I ever wasn't here and she needed to turn the water from the sun to the inverter, I wanted her to be able to do it without any issues. One of the last things that I think I'm going to do is I'm either going to put this outlet on a switch, or I'm going to figure out some way for her to basically just walk up and throw a switch right here instead of having to plug that in. She's a little bit shorter than me, and I don't know that she's going to appreciate it if she has to stand on a bucket to plug that in. So, but overall, we now have all of our controls for both of our solar system and our water system in our utility room in here. In the potential bad weather conditions where we live, this is a beautiful thing. I know, like I said, I no longer have to go down and put gas in a generator that powers the inverter, that powers the pump, that fills the tanks up. So it's been a progression over the last 7 years figuring this stuff out. But let's run up to the water tanks and I will show you the next part of this system. There's Bandit. There's Willie the Wonder Dog. Ruby, where are you at? And there's Ruby over there. Come here, Rube. My wife just informed me that 5 years ago today we got our German short hair, Ruby, that I love so much. She's usually my partner in crime when I have to go to town, which I try not to do very often. It used to be that there was a water line that ran right down the center of our yard down to the shallow well. But last week I severed that line and I added the yard hydrant right here. This is the lowest point down here. I should check the elevation down here while I'm at it. 5,544 feet right here standing next to this yard hydrant. So technically this yard hydrant should have the highest pressure of any yard hydrant on our property because this is the lowest point from the highest point, which is our water tanks. So I would guess if I threw a gauge on this, it's probably somewhere between 80 and 100 PSI. And this is a true 1-inch water line. So I'm going to put sprinklers in next summer. So my wife doesn't have to worry about watering the front yard here. She really wants to have a nice, beautiful front lawn. And now we have the ability, we have the water capacity to be able to do things like that. So let's run up to the water tanks and I'll show you guys the next step. So things are always changing around here at Red Poppy Ranch, especially as I can figure out better ways to do things, especially as our little deer farm grows and expands and the more animals that we have that depend on water, the more our water system needs to be able to keep up with it. And by drilling this new well, there's no longer really any concerns about not having the abundance of water that we will always need. So at the moment, we have two 2,500 gallon above ground plastic Norwesco water tanks that are kept inside of this, bunker is the word that I use for lack of a better word, that I made out of railroad ties. And you can see the deer have already started playing with the plastic a little bit. I need to get up here and finish the board and batten siding that I always intended on putting on this. But the plan is to do the same thing next summer right next to it and tie these sets of tanks together so we would then have a total of 10,000 gallons of water available to us to use when we need it. During the warmer months, when the grass is growing, the plan is to have sprinklers all over the place to try and get the front yards, the lower deer pens, where they have beautiful grass. So when I do pull the deer off the big deer pen up here, they have something down there to keep them out of the mud and something down there for them to chew on. So part of that process is going to require two more 2,500 gallon tanks, which are now up here and ready to basically do the same thing that I did here. I'm going to do right next to them, hopefully early summer next year. Let's go inside and I'm going to show you what we have inside. So inside this box, I have 2 ball valves that controls each tank. And the idea behind that is if I need to add a yard hydrant or something like that down in the water system, rather than waiting for the tanks to completely drain, I can simply come up here and shut the ball valves off and then drain the water that's in the water lines going down to whatever I happen to be working on. And I don't lose all the water that we've worked so hard to collect. So I'm going to open up the box and show you what we have going on in there. Now, I've opened this box and found everything from a rubber boa, and I leave those guys alone. They're kind of interesting snakes, and I like to let them coexist with what we have going on. But usually where there's a rubber boa, there's probably some voles or some mice living. But again, it doesn't really bother me. So I'm going to open this up and show you what it looks like basically every time I open it up. There's a ball valve right here. I'm not going to mess with it. And there's also a ball valve right here, and I can reach underneath. I can reach underneath and close that ball valve as I need to. And I've never had any issues, even on the coldest days of the year that we've had, probably 20 below zero, maybe even a little colder than that. We've never ever had water freezing issues. The water comes out of the ground from our deep well at somewhere around probably 35 degrees. And by the time it gets up here to these tanks, I would guess it's closer to 40 degrees. And after sitting in the earth like this, it warms up to probably somewhere between 40 and 50, maybe even a little bit over 50 degrees. So it's very warm in here in the middle of winter. As long as this door stays closed, we've never had any issues with water freezing or anything like that. Those big giant water tanks full of water act like a battery for heat. So the same thing is going to happen over here with these 2 tanks. Early summer, I need to round up all the railroad ties that I'm gonna use to build another bunker around these tanks, and then I will run a water line from these 2 tanks over to the existing water line that I already have, and I'll put ball valves on this, basically the same exact thing, and then I will let the sun fill these tanks up with water. One of the things that I have found about living completely off-grid on the side of a mountain out in the middle of nowhere is you have to be present. You have to pay attention to what your batteries are at. You have to pay attention to what your water's at. Almost every single day in the wintertime, I check the water tank levels. I check the battery percentages to make sure we're high enough. And I just kind of have to stay on top of things. It isn't, I could set things up in a way where I don't have to pay attention to anything, but I prefer to just not get surprised. So especially when it comes to water, because I know how important it is to my wife and my kids, I stay on top of this stuff. So while we're up here, let's check the elevation to see what the difference is between that lower yard hydrant. Yeah, 5,727 to 28 feet. So that's the difference between that lower yard hydrant down there and the water tank up here. So there's a pretty simple formula to help you figure this out. I think it's for every 1 foot, it's 4.3 pounds. I can't remember the exact formula because like I said, we have over 80 PSI typically right there at the house. And by the way, I used blue poly pipe everywhere on the property instead of using black poly, instead of using PEX. I used blue poly because blue poly accepts PEX fittings. As far as the crimpable fittings, when I first started running water lines all over the property, I sent an email to the, he's the North American rep over all of the manufacturing of PEX products, and I asked him what I should use. Should I use compression fittings and big black poly pipe, or was there a way for me to use blue poly, which has a higher PSI rating than black poly, and then I don't have to use the big expensive compression fittings that the CTS fittings that are required with that black poly? And his email response to me, again, this is from the rep, from all of the manufacturers of all the PEX products, he said all you have to do is wrap your crimp rings, which are brass, and your fittings, which are also brass. There's plastic fittings, but I don't use those plastic fittings if I can help it. I try to use brass. Wrap them in electrical tape so they're not in direct contact with the ground. So for the last 7 years, that's what I've done. I've used blue poly pipe. I probably have over 1,500 feet of blue poly pipe all over the property. From up here where we're at, I ran water line all the way up the hill. which in and of itself was a ridiculous challenge, but I got the water lines up here. But I got the water lines at least 3 feet deep. In most cases, it's probably closer to 4 and 5 feet deep. And I've never had any issues, knock on wood, I've never had any issues with those crimp fittings. Those are the fittings that I use. Just last week, I installed a new yard hydrant down there in the front yard, and I used those same crimp fittings. And when I was finished, I wrapped it in electrical tape and I backfilled it. When I got the first estimate from the first well drillers a few months back, the first well driller said that this wouldn't work, that I wouldn't be able to use sun to power my well pump, to fill my water tanks, to ultimately have 80 psi of all the water that we need to run our life and to keep our lives moving. I have one 1-inch line that runs up here. I don't have multiple lines. I chose to just do one main line and that's it. And everything I do around here with the animals, as far as watering the animals, as far as all of the stuff that I intend on doing in the future with sprinklers, I just have to spec it according to the pressure and the volume that I have. And I couldn't see a reason to have anything more than a 1-inch water line in our situation. But again, the only thing that I anticipate changing in the not too distant future is adding 2 more of those water tanks to our system. And then we would have 10,000 gallons of capacity. And if for some reason there ends up being a need to have even more water, I could add 2 more right here. We could end up with 15 or even 20,000 gallons of capacity. And at some point, I'm going to finish the siding. At some point, I'm going to stack some boulders around this to kind of make it pretty. This is inside our deer pen, and our deer kind of get curious and they play around with stuff. And if I don't cover this bunker with siding at some point in the near future, eventually they're just going to pull all the plastic off of that, and I don't want that to happen. This is another project that I've got to get done at some point in the near future. So anyway, let's run back down to the house and we will wrap this up. Okay, I am back down here at the new deep well with the solar panels over my shoulder. And I just wanted to wrap up and say a couple of things. This spring represents 10 years since we first bought this piece of property that nobody else wanted. That was probably the craziest thing I've ever done in my life, was trying to figure out how to live up here. One of the very first things I figured out as I started to simply cut down trees and thin the property and figure out what was usable and what wasn't, one of the things I knew I had to accomplish was I knew I had to have the amenities that my wife and my kids were used to having, starting with running water, starting with light switch, being able to turn on power, starting with the basic stuff. On a regular basis, I used to see a comment that made me laugh, where people would say, I would love to have what you have, but I'm not willing to go as far as you've gone to get what you have. And there's a lot of truth in that statement. I don't think most people are willing to go as far as you're required to go to have the freedoms and the independence that comes from living completely off-grid. We don't have a power bill. We don't have a water bill. Frankly, we don't have a mortgage either. All of this stuff happened after a whole lot of hard work and pushing up against the resistance that initially I ran up against when I started this process. I didn't have any framing experience. I didn't really have a whole lot of construction experience other than the plumbing. And I was willing to try and fail and try and fail and try and fail as many times as it took to figure this out. Now, if I could go back and talk to the younger version of me, I would probably try and avoid putting 3 roofs on this house in the first few years. I would probably avoid having to change the entire pitch of the front and the back of the house because it wasn't steep enough, things like that. But sometimes you just got to learn, and guys like me sometimes got to learn the hard way. So the only thing that I would do different about our water system after using that shallow well for the last 7 years is I would not have ever bothered with the shallow well. I would have drilled a well right here next to the house 7 years ago, and I would have incorporated this deep well into the water system that I have. But again, sometimes guys like me got to learn the hard way. So, and this summer has been one of those summers where I've had a lot of challenges, and I still have challenges on a regular basis, but I think that comes with the territory. There's a whole lot of things that help me sleep better at night because of how we live, and I wouldn't change that. I wouldn't change any of that. All of the hard things that I had to go through, the experiences that I had to go through to figure out just how far I'm capable of going, I wouldn't change any of that, because ultimately I now know what I'm capable of, or at least I think I know what I'm capable of, and I'm not afraid to try more than anything else. I would say that's probably the underlying factor, that you got to be willing to fail and get up and fail again and get up and fail again if that's what it takes to get some of this stuff figured out. So recently, our daughter Callie has been going through the process of getting her learner's permit and getting her driver's license. And over the last year, she has been doing a lot of driving with a driving instructor. And on one particular day, the instructor took the other 3 kids, I believe there was 3 kids that she was driving with in that car, and they all drove to their own homes. And on that day, Callie got to drive her friends and this teacher up here and show her where our house was. As they came up here and saw what we had, that led to a whole bunch of questions. And it's fun for me as a father, hear about my daughter explaining to this teacher just in fact what our life is up here. To me, it's unique and it makes her unique. And I hope someday, maybe long after I'm gone, that my kids think back on this time that they lived here very fondly, because even though there have been challenges and there have been struggles, ultimately it is a net positive, to say the least. As the world gets scarier and scarier, in my opinion, doing something like this is becoming more and more important. I have found that over the last 5 years, that as things that are completely out of my control in the rest of the world become crazier and crazier, what I know for a fact is right here at our little 80-acre spread, I know what I have control over, and I know that we can live with what we have control over, and that's a beautiful place to live as well. Being independent from a power grid, having a completely independent water system that's powered by the sun, having batteries that are charged by the sun, all of this stuff is really, really unique, and it's really fun, especially when you have to get there the hard way. We didn't have a gigantic pile of cash to start with, and so a lot of this stuff we kind of had to figure out along the way. But the end result is where we are now. I couldn't be happier with where we are, and I know my wife and my kids are into it. There are days when that road gets muddy that it can be a little bit challenging, but overall, we're not going anywhere. My kids know this is, even my older kids, they know this is a safe place, and it's always going to be here. And that's kind of my goal as a father, is to have a safe place that no matter what's going on in the world, my kids know that Red Poppy Ranch, there will always be a warm fire, there will always be a place to sleep, and there will always be food to put in their bellies. At least that's my wife's mission in life, is to make sure my kids, when they get here, every Sunday afternoon when we have Sunday dinner with our older kids, my wife's goal is to make sure they leave with more food than they came with. So anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this, and we will see you again soon.